February 18th, 1944. An anti-aircraft gun emplacement overlooking the Thames estuary, southern England. The wind screams off the grey North Sea, rattling the corrugated iron of the watch hut. Inside, the only light comes from the glow of the radar cathode ray tube. Sergeant Helen McLean leans in, her breath fogging the air above the screen, her headset tight against her ears. The rhythmic, low-level pulse of the equipment is the heartbeat of their solitary world. Suddenly, a tiny blip flickers on the edge of the circular display. A single, insistent pinprick of light. "Contact," she murmurs, her voice professionally steady, cutting through the static. Range 45 miles, bearing 092. Target altitude? Low. The air thickens instantly. This isn't a friendly. Friendlies don't hug the water this close to the coast at 200 hours. This is a lone, fast German intruder, likely a reconnaissance plane or, worse, a Junkers Ju-88 night bomber trying to slip into the London corridor. Outside the hut, the 40mm Bofors guns stand silent, menacing silhouettes against the faint moonlight. The crew, mostly women bundled in thick greatcoats and gloves, move with practiced, silent efficiency to their positions. Gunner Peggy Norton slides into the seat of the predictor, the complex mechanical computer that will calculate the enemy's speed, range, and altitude to determine the precise aim for the heavy guns. It is a mathematical beast, demanding unwavering focus. The blip on McLean's screen grows larger, moving rapidly inward. Speed 300 knots and holding, coming in fast. Girls, prepare to lock on. McLean calls out. Her heart hammers, a frantic, unsynchronized drum to the electronic rhythm of the radar. Every single person in this emplacement, from the spotters to the loaders to the sergeant controlling the fire, is a woman of the Canadian Women's Army Corps, WWII, a presence here that, just 3 years prior, would have been unimaginable to the High Command, to the German air crews, and even to most of the public. They were the secret batteries of Britain's defense, defying every traditional expectation of war. Peggy Norton's hands fly across the controls of the predictor, her eyes glued to the dials, waiting for the command to fire the moment the target enters the kill zone. The war that erupted in 1939 was an overwhelmingly male enterprise, a grinding clash of armies, ships, and planes that devoured men. Yet, behind the front lines, the machinery of modern conflict demanded something unprecedented. Millions of support personnel. For Canada, a nation committed deeply to the Allied cause, this created a profound logistical crisis. Too many men were needed for combat. Too few were left for the vital, non-combat roles. In the early months of the war, Canadian women stepped forward en masse, volunteering for everything from nursing to factory work. But it wasn't enough. The Army needed a formal, disciplined structure to absorb this patriotic energy. Thus, in 1941, the Canadian Women's Army Corps, WWII, was officially sanctioned, initially under the guise of an auxiliary force, later becoming a permanent part of the active militia. The official mandate was safe, palatable, and reassuringly non-combative. Clerical work, driving, cooking, and medical assistance. They would free up the fighting men. Private Eleanor Ellie Vance, a former ledger clerk from Toronto, signed up immediately. Like thousands of others, she traded her civilian life for the khaki uniform, the sensible shoes, and the severe cap. Her initial posting, fittingly, was to a massive administrative depot in Ontario, spending her days typing orders and maintaining vast personnel files. It was essential work, but she yearned for more direct participation. The propaganda posters spoke of freedom and crushing tyranny. Her reality was endless paperwork. However, the reality of war, especially the brutal German blitz on Britain, quickly redefined what was essential. The British had already mobilized women extensively into the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, even placing them on anti-aircraft guns. As Canadian troops shipped overseas to reinforce Britain against invasion, the WWII followed, beginning their deployment in 1942. They were still officially performing their support roles. But the needs of the home defense, the protection of vital ports, factories, and military installations from Luftwaffe attacks were critical, and the manpower shortage was acute. It was in the heavily defended areas of southern England, particularly around the crucial ports and the industrial Midlands, that the line between clerical and combat began to blur. The complex nature of anti-aircraft warfare, involving electronics, mathematics, and intricate mechanical devices like the kerosene predictor, required skills that transcended mere brute strength. The key requirement was precision and the ability to maintain calm under pressure, traits the WWII women possessed in abundance. The initial transition was unofficial, a slow infiltration. WWII personnel were assigned to radar units, which the Army insisted were communication roles. They handled the sensitive equipment, tracking the incoming raids, but the proximity to the guns, the familiarity with the targeting data, and the sheer desperation for trained personnel made the next step inevitable. Slowly, quietly, and often against the explicit wishes of tradition-bound commanders, the women were trained. They learned the mechanisms of the massive 3.7-inch heavy anti-aircraft guns, the intricate calibration of the firing systems, and the deadly, precise dance of the predictor operators. They were no longer clerks. They were the unseen guardians of the skies. Back at the Thames Estuary gun site, Sergeant McLean's voice cuts through the quiet focus. They're past the limit. Target is 28 miles. Prepare to engage. Peggy Norton takes a deep breath, her hands steadying on the predictor's wheels. The fate of their target, and perhaps the safety of London itself, rests on her calculated aim. Early 1943, a secluded training facility near Portsmouth, southern England. The official training regimen for the Canadian Women's Army Corps in England remained strictly focused on administrative and logistical tasks. Yet, away from the official inspection routes, a shadow program was in full swing. Colonel Alistair Davies, a veteran artillery officer commanding a crucial anti-aircraft defense sector, recognized the sheer impracticality of maintaining the men-only rule for the heavy guns. He needed skilled hands, and the WWII provided the most highly motivated and technically astute recruits. Davies, operating under a tacit agreement of military necessity, decided to break the rules. The challenge was not physical, it was psychological and technical. Operating the 3.7-inch AA gun required strength for loading, but the brains of the operation, the high-angle control system, hacks, and the predictor, demanded dexterity, concentration, and advanced spatial reasoning. These were areas where the women excelled. Davies's instructors, bound to secrecy, began teaching the WWII gunners the language of radar, the physics of trajectory, and the lightning-fast calculations needed to track a diving bomber. Private Ellie Vance, now transferred overseas, found herself among the chosen few. She wasn't just typing reports anymore. She was learning to differentiate a Me-110 from a He-111 based on its radar signature and airspeed. Her clerical focus translated perfectly into the meticulous care required by the sensitive equipment. The work was demanding, the hours unforgiving, and the secrecy absolute. They were told, if you are captured, you are not to reveal your operational role. You are clerks, drivers, canteen workers. That is all. The Geneva Conventions were unclear on the status of women in direct combat support roles, adding a sharp, real edge of danger to their already hazardous duty. By late 1943, several Canadian anti-aircraft batteries were staffed almost entirely by WWII personnel, integrated seamlessly into the British defence network. The ground crews, the ammunition handlers, the radar operators, the predictors, and even the fire controllers, all women, often operating the GLMEC through radar, gun-laying radar, that guided the massive guns. Their efficiency quickly surpassed many of the all-male crews, largely due to their superior patience and attention to detail. This deployment was a closely held secret, known only at the highest military levels. The local communities saw women in khaki moving supplies, but few knew that the heavy, thunderous roar they heard at night came from guns manned almost exclusively by women. The Germans certainly did not know. The prevailing military doctrine in Nazi Germany, based on rigid gender roles, considered the deployment of women in direct combat support roles unthinkable, let alone in control of heavy artillery. The moment of stark realization for the Luftwaffe came during the intensifying night raids against British ports. Lieutenant Colonel Karl Richter, an experienced Joe 88 pilot, had flown dozens of successful missions over England. He knew the typical pattern of the British defences, the slow, heavy response of the AA batteries. Then, one bitterly cold night in February 1944, over the strategic port of Southampton, Richter's aircraft was caught in a brutal, coordinated defence pattern. His radar warning receiver screamed, and before he could react, the air around his bomber erupted in flak. The bursts were terrifyingly close. Too accurate, too fast. His right engine sputtered and died, hit by a perfectly aimed shell. Richter managed to limp back to occupied France, his mission a failure. During the debriefing, Richter described the anti-aircraft fire as the most viciously precise he had ever encountered on the home front. Later, when an Allied POW dossier inadvertently revealed the composition of some of the defense batteries, the information was filtered up to the Luftwaffe High Command. The report, verified by captured papers, stated that certain British and Canadian anti-aircraft positions were entirely operated by women. The initial reaction among the German officer corps was one of utter disbelief and shock. It was a violation of the perceived rules of warfare, an incredible statement on Allied desperation, or perhaps a testament to a capability they never imagined women possessing. Back on the Thames estuary, Sergeant McLean's radar blip has closed the gap. 18 miles. Target is still maintaining altitude. Gunner on target. Peggy Norton's breath catches, the predictor humming beneath her touch. She has all the data locked. Ready, she whispers into the mic. McLean glances at the watch hut door, knowing the moment the firing command is given, the world will explode around them. February 18th, 1944, 2:04 a.m., Anti-Aircraft Battery, Thames Estuary. The moment hangs tautly, suspended between the rhythmic sweep of the radar beam and the frantic beat of human fear and readiness. Sergeant Helen McLean lifts her microphone. The blip is now agonizingly close. 12 miles, entering the effective range of the 3.7-inch heavy AA guns. The target, confirmed as a single Ju 88, is clearly visible on the optical sighting system now. A dark mosquito against the bruised sky, flying low and fast, hugging the riverline to evade detection. Fire control. McLean's voice rings out, sharp and commanding. 10 seconds to intercept. Targets locked. Fire. The command is instantaneously relayed. Outside, the world dissolves into a deafening, percussive chaos. The massive 3.7-inch guns, which had been preloaded with high-explosive shells, roar into action. The recoil is staggering, shaking the very ground the women stand on, sending shock waves through the night air. Muzzle flashes briefly turn the gun emplacement into a terrifying spectacle of light. a blinding orange-red bloom followed by the stench of cordite and burning propellant. Gunner Peggy Norton, still hunched over the predictor, tracks the target, making minute adjustments as the computer calculates the complex path the shell must take to meet the speeding aircraft. She ignores the violent noise and the vibration. Her focus is absolute. Her job is not just to aim, but to calculate the fuse setting, the precise altitude and time at which the shell will detonate. An error of a few milliseconds means a clean miss. The predictor, calibrated by her colleagues and now driven by her input, is the key to their deadly precision. The first shells streak into the sky, their paths invisible, culminating in small, sharp bursts of light miles away. Flak, the black cloud of lethal shrapnel designed to tear apart aircraft wings and fuselages. The burst pattern is tight, guided by the flawless input from the WWII crew. In the cockpit of the Ju-88, Hauptmann Erich Voss curses loudly. The flak is not the usual scattered, hopeful barrage. It is concentrated and right behind him. The blasts are so close, his co-pilot screams as shrapnel pings off the armored glass. Voss throws the control column hard, diving steeply to break the lock, flooding the engines with power. He knows this defense sector is formidable. But tonight, it feels like they are being stalked by an invisible, highly aggressive hunter. He had been briefed that the heavy AA guns were mostly manned by older, less proficient British men. This fire felt professional, almost personal. McLean's radar screen confirms the maneuver. Target diving, changing altitude rapidly, speed increasing, she barks. Peggy Norton immediately compensates, spinning the dials to feed the new, rapidly changing data into the predictor. She needs to predict where the bomber will be, not where it is now. This demanding a split-second calculation is where the WWII training proved invaluable. A second salvo of shells rips into the sky. This time, the outcome is different. The air around the diving Ju-88 is suddenly consumed by a fiery orange detonation. The shell, fused perfectly, explodes directly beneath the bomber's tail assembly. A bright, secondary explosion rips through the fuselage, followed by a shower of debris and flame. The aircraft, now fatally crippled, spirals downward, a blazing meteor falling towards the cold, dark waters of the estuary. "Target destroyed," a spotter screams into the headset, her voice raw with relief and triumph. "Confirmed impact in Sector Delta 4. A wave of exhausted exhilaration washes over the crew." McLean leans back, pulling her headset off, the sudden silence of the watch hut almost painful. They had done it. They had operated the heavy artillery, tracked the target, calculated the complex geometry of the intercept, and executed the kill, all while maintaining the highest standard of operational precision. The evidence was the fiery destruction lighting up the distant horizon. The mission was a success, but the secret held firm. When the Allied recovery teams later examined the wreckage and interrogated the few surviving German airmen, the men spoke only of the relentless, highly accurate fire. They never discovered that the hands on the intricate predictors and the voices in the fire control network belonged to the Canadian women they dismissed as mere clerks. The WWII had earned their combat stripes in the most dramatic way possible, all while remaining ghosts in the machine. February 18th, 1944. Dawn. Thames Estuary. England. The sky's an iron-grey canvas streaked with the faint, rising smoke of the night's battle. The water below glints with the reflection of a smouldering wreck, what remains of the Ju-88 that dared to cross into Allied airspace. Sergeant Helen McLean stands outside the command hut, her greatcoat pulled tight against the freezing wind. Her hands still smell faintly of ozone and gun oil. Around her, the crew moves in weary silence, clearing shell casings, reloading, logging the engagement details. To anyone passing by, it looks like the aftermath of any ordinary anti-aircraft action, Only the women's faces, flushed from adrenaline and exhaustion, tell another story. Corporal Peggy Norton stares at the distant horizon, eyes rimmed red but alive with a rare satisfaction. "Do you think they'll tell anyone?" she asks quietly. McLean shakes her head. "They can't. Officially. We were never here." The order had come hours earlier, straight from HQ, delivered through encrypted channels. No acknowledgement of participation, all reports to list engagement by Standard Mixed Battery, Home Defense Command. Not a single line would mention CWAC personnel. Even the gun logs would be signed under the names of their nominal male overseers, men who often hadn't even been on site. It was a bitter reality of wartime bureaucracy. Their victory, like so many of their contributions, would vanish into classified archives. Yet, among themselves, they knew, and that was enough, for now. Later that morning, Colonel Alistair Davies visited the emplacement, his greatcoat flapping in the bitter wind. The women snapped to attention, boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Ladies," he began, his tone brisk but unmistakably warm. "That bomber you brought down last night, it was carrying reconnaissance equipment, high-altitude cameras. They were mapping our radar coverage zones. You may have just prevented an entire raid." He paused, studying their faces, faces that reflected fatigue, pride, and the quiet steel of those who knew they'd crossed an invisible line. "You did your duty under fire, and you did it flawlessly. But understand this. You'll get no medal for it, not today. Maybe not ever." There was no complaint, no protest, only silent nods. They understood the price of secrecy. As Davies turned to leave, he hesitated and added, "History will catch up eventually. When it does, make sure it knows who really kept the skies clear." The following weeks blurred into a relentless pattern. Radar pings, flak bursts, long nights of cold coffee and nerve-twisting vigilance. The women grew sharper, faster, their teamwork instinctive. They had become a single organism. Radar, predictor, and gun fused into one beating heart of steel and calculation. But with each engagement, whispers began to spread among the nearby RAF stations and Royal Artillery men, stories of ghost batteries that hit targets with impossible precision. Some swore the gunners must be American specialists. Others joked about Churchill's invisible angels. The truth was far stranger and far braver than any of them guessed. May 1944, Southampton Command Sector. The invasion of Europe was imminent. Across the southern coast of England, every port, every rail line, every depot vibrated with tension and movement. The women of the CWAC had been reassigned across multiple batteries by now, each group integrated under various designations. Still anonymous, still essential. One evening, Private Ellie Vance found herself back at the radar console in a new sector, her hands moving over the equipment as naturally as breathing. Outside, the sky flashed with distant gunfire. She'd come a long way from her desk in Ontario. She wasn't typing anymore. She was defending a nation. The German Air Command, having intercepted fragments of intelligence from their captured officers, had finally confirmed what many had dismissed as Allied propaganda. Reports from Luftwaffe intelligence summarized it bluntly. Several anti-aircraft installations in southern England are operated by female personnel of Canadian origin. Their effectiveness is disproportionate to expectations. Morale impact on German air crews? Severe. When the report reached Berlin, the reaction was a mix of outrage and disbelief. "Impossible," one general reportedly spat. "Women cannot perform in sustained combat roles." And yet, the blackened wrecks of downed bombers across the English countryside told another story. Back in England, as preparations for D-Day accelerated, the CWAC batteries were quietly withdrawn from front-line firing duties. Their secrecy was too valuable. and the political optics too fragile for open acknowledgement. They returned to their clerical postings, filing paperwork and processing communications, though every keystroke carried the weight of nights spent under fire. After VE Day, most of the women simply went home, their wartime records, redacted and reclassified, mentioned communications duties, nothing more. For decades, their names did not appear in any citation lists, and their service remained confined to whispers between veterans. But history, as Colonel Davies once promised, eventually caught up. In the late 20th century, declassified documents and interviews with surviving WWII members began to surface. Historians found evidence of entire batteries, fully operational, fully female, whose kill ratios exceeded the national average. The photographs showed young women in greatcoats, their hair tucked under helmets, standing proudly beside 3.7-inch guns as tall as themselves. They were no longer ghosts. Today, at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, a single artifact tells their story. A worn predictor wheel, its brass surface polished smooth by the hands of Sergeant Helen McLean's crew. Beneath it, a simple plaque reads, "They listened. They calculated. They fired. They were never meant to fight. But they did." The roar of the guns has long since faded. The North Sea winds have carried their echoes away. But if you listen closely, on a cold February night, when the fog drifts over the Thames and the sky hums with distant thunder, you might still hear them, Canada's secret gunners, women who rewrote the rules of war.